There we go. Manoj, let's talk about this first of all. I said, whenever I turn on the television in India, I'm fascinated. I love it. And it is changing so quickly, partly because of technology that allows that to happen, but by societal change as well. So maybe you can run us through some of the changes that you've seen so far. And Arnab, I think, is joining us.
I think the biggest change that I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years is how people are now consuming their news. There is, of course, still a huge audience for terrestrial television and the conventional media, but the growth of digital media and the use of WhatsApp in particular, the proliferation of WhatsApp, has really changed the entire game. And I think Umang's more qualified to speak of this because he's built a huge business out of the digitization of media. But I think people are now, they don't sort of just wait for the 9 o'clock news, just as in this, I'm sorry to say that, we don't wait for breakfast. We'll watch you at 7 o'clock in the evening if we've missed you in the day. So it's more a question of use of mobile for watching news. But having said that, and I'm not just saying because Arnab's on the screen here now. And hi, Arnab. How are you? Can we hear him? It's not just because Arnab's on the screen. There are certain programs where people just don't want to miss. And whatever we may think in this part of the world of these big sort of debates with 7, 10 people on the screen at the same time, there's something gripping that the Indian public really love about this. And so those prime times and super prime times are also quite, so you've got this entire mix of media that's going on. But I think pushing through all of that are digital platforms and mobile platforms.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that actually. I mean, when we talk about this proliferation of technology, it puts so much power in the hands of a consumer of news.
Correct.
I know about that all too well in my job, and as Manoj said, you've made a business out of that. Just explain a little bit.
So, it's kind of funny that we're 1 year later. I came here last year and Manoj and I were talking about this very subject in this room. And he kept pushing me saying, Umang, India is not about just tier 1 audiences. India, which is the voting population, or Bharat, is well beyond in several languages, which kind of resonated with us because we communicate news and information in 15 different languages. But we were just an aggregator. We would work with publishers and aggregate a news feed at that point of time. What we've now done over the last year, and this kind of resonated, and Arnab should talk to this point because he probably knows this better than anyone else in the room, is the voice of Bharat was really reflected in this election, right? And what we had done was we set up our own networks wherein we launched 543 TV channels on the app, which was getting hyper-local information from 543 constituencies. And that gave you the pulse of Bharat, unlike the pulse of India, right? And it was funny because in November when we did a poll, the results of the current election were bang on with that poll. And we were banned by the Press Trust of India, we were banned by the Congress because it felt like it was a biased medium, but it wasn't. It was just a reflection of what Bharat was telling us, because this was 6 million people that responded to a poll of 14 questions, which is the largest poll in the history of mankind. And it was done by AC Nielsen. It wasn't even done by Daily Hunt. But essentially, it's about getting the pulse of Bharat. It's about going deep into the wefts and wofts of society. And while there is mobile, which is proliferating and driving democratization of access and technology, TV still remains a very big aspirational element within India, within tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, within rural, right? It's counted as one of those consumer items that you want to buy. And so TV is not going anywhere in my mind, right? It's there to stay. Print, on the other hand, I have a different story, right? That's getting completely democratized.
On that theme, let's bring in Arnab. And Arnab, welcome. I hope you can hear us, and we've established a connection to you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Good. It's lovely to see you, and thank you for taking the time. Maybe for those who aren't aware, and I think there will be very few in this room that aren't aware, but just talk to me a little bit about Republic TV. What is it? How does it work? And why is it such a success?
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Ben. Congratulations, Manoj, for doing this. I wish I could be with you in person. So, Umang, thanks. Good to see you. About Republic TV, Ben, Simple thing is that this country is changing. And the media in this country is also changing. And Republic Media Network is a reflection of that change. So a few pointers about the Republic Media Network, so, for all those in the audience understand where exactly we stand at the inflection point of the changing trends in the Indian media. The first and interesting thing about the Republic Media Network is that it is the completely professional and content and journalist owned, managed, and run organization. So that is the first thing about us. Secondly, we are representative of the shift away from New Delhi in the media landscape in India. Because now for the longest time, almost 6.5 decades, almost 7 decades, the media in India was totally centered around New Delhi. And now that is shifting away from Delhi. Just as you find that a particular circuit which used to operate and run the country out of the Delhi Gymkhana Club has become irrelevant, as is now, people can no longer say that 2014 was an aberration. It was not. Those people who thought that it was an aberration, they were the anomaly. And now the media sector is shifting out of Delhi. And I predict, therefore, that in the future, the print organizations will be centered around Delhi, but the television and new age and digital businesses will slowly begin to move outside of Delhi. And it's interesting that I'm saying this to you today because tomorrow we are going to announce the launch of a new federation of media in India called the News Broadcasters Federation, in which we will have almost 50 to 60 news channels, all news channels outside of Delhi, who are now reclaiming their place in the voice of this country. So Republic is at an inflection point of that. We run a very successful #1 English channel. We run the #2 Hindi channel in the country today. And we are on the verge of massive experiments in digital, both domestically and around the country. But just to keep the long story short, the fact that we are just a 2-year-old organization. And in our David and Goliath battle, we have beaten all the old legacy players in media in India. We have given a bloody nose to the Times of India, to Z News, to the big players. The fact that we have come together and captured the market share is also a reflection of the fact that people in India are tired of the old players and now want to see a shift. And before I summarize this, and I can tell you more about how I view the shifts in trend affecting our presence globally, one thing to remember is that in the next 10 years, India will be the media capital of the world. And it is an inevitability. It is just an absolute accident that this has not happened till now. So we will be leading that tide because we have technology, we have youth. Ben, please don't get provoked by this, but I do say that we speak better English than most people in your country. And therefore, we have a unique advantage besides being democracy. And look at the rate of our growth. Our media sector is growing at 9%, which is twice that of China, and 9 times that of the United States of America. So we are now gaining as a country in ambition, and the new age media players of India are also going to grow in ambition and eventually go beyond the geography of the country.
Manoj, I think it's so interesting there hearing from Arnab about the proliferation of news channels and the availability of media and just the sheer number of sources, and then to talk about the hyper-local TV that you're doing. I mean, in the UK, quite clearly very different scale, but we struggle to sustain 2 news channels because the audiences just aren't there, because the audience is on mobile, they get the headline and they move on. Manoj, how does that work in India? And is this just because there's a technological shift, or actually there is still an appetite for television if it is done correctly?
I think there is India's been suppressed for many years, or Indians have been suppressed from a media perspective for many, many years in terms of the availability of different channels and so on. It's only in the last 15 or 20 years that this phenomenon has arisen. And given the cultural diversity and the cultural complexity, I think as Umang mentioned, and as what Arnab has alluded to, the real democratization of news and the real localization of news has happened. And so people are now feeling quite empowered that actually through their mobile or through local television channels, and more so, I think, the push against elite English media in India has taken place. And that shift to more power to vernacular media, which you guys have all been working on, that has really led to ordinary Indians feeling very comfortable that actually this is our media, this is something that represents us, represents our locality. And that's the big change, that democratization and the fact that people that don't speak English also feel engaged with local and indeed national and international politics and international affairs. I think that's the real big change, and that's only going to grow, I think.
But that brings, whilst benefits, there are also huge drawbacks in some respects because, and I hate the phrase fake news, there should be no other version, news is news, but there is a responsibility in that. It's very easy to disseminate, but there are very few checks about whether it's accurate. I mean, how do you contend with that?
So, AI and ML, the way it's being touted, is probably the best way to build a news feed. But what AI and ML does, and I think this country has experienced it in its own way, is it creates echo chambers, right? And so what happens is, whether it's in the US or in UK, we've seen these echo chambers get created, even if you're following one source of content, right? So there are three things that we're doing, which I think is unique and different. Now, I just want to touch on something Arnab said around globalization. But I'll just answer your question first. So the first thing that we're doing is we verify all of these sources of content. Even if there are 2 red flags on it or 2 flags by a user, we bring it down. The second thing that we've done is we've tweaked the algorithms. See, the media business is very simple when you come to digital. It's about you get the maximum user base and get them to spend the maximum amount of time, period. There's no third equation. There's no third lever to press on the button on, right? Now, if I keep showing you stuff that you want to see, right, I am propagating that echo chamber. And so we broke that with the algorithm to say, we're going to show you different perspectives. So this election, we launched a campaign which says, see different sides of the story. So if I'm seeing left-wing media, which is propagating a certain point of view, for that very narrative, I'm going to show you 5 other points of view. Let's say demonetization, right? Was it good for the country or was it bad for the country? There are two schools of thought. So we would show you those schools of thought so that you can form your own informed opinion. The other thing that Arnab said is, India is going to be the media capital of the world. And I see that happening right now. So, today we are at about 275 million monthly active users on the platform on Daily Hunt in India. In the next 3 months, we cross 300 million, which is when we would be larger than the global giants in the country. And in the next 2 years, with the internet moving to vernacular, we think we'll get to about 500 million users on the platform, right? Interestingly, about 20% of them is Indian diaspora coming from international markets. So I think there are 2 things that I wanted to say here. Forums like what we're doing here today get really important in terms of propagating that message, but also how do you get that message translated into languages? Because interestingly, we were the 3rd largest app in Singapore. We didn't realize it. We've never even done anything in Singapore, but there were lots of Tamilians and Telugu population there, right? Same with the Middle East. In Dubai, people know me, and I've never gone there for business, to be straight with you. They know the brand. And so the interesting part is, with the young population, with us providing the demographic dividend of India's workforce, we're going to practically be feeding the entire world with that workforce, right, in the next 10 years. And so the medium by which we communicate, whether it's television, whether it's mobile, India is going to become the hub or the epicenter for media. And I think that shift is going to be hard for some of the global players to digest. And I see it coming right now, just to Arnab's point.
Yeah, and Arnab, I wonder if I can bring you back in at this point, because you talk about that huge proliferation of channels. And I wonder, you're in a position where you need to attract viewers and eyeballs and regular watchers of those shows, but at the same time, as we heard here from Umang, about the balance, the journalistic credentials, and making sure that what you're presenting is not just entertainment, but it's factual too. How do you square that circle?
Well, I mean, we would just be sure that we never do what the BBC does.
Which is what?
the fundamental thing, Ben, you got to understand, is that the growth of the Indian media is apart from the state. It's away from the state. And how can a country have soft power if the players in the media are not independent? Now, if, for example, why do I feel that the BBC is a soft opportunity, lost opportunity? Because it's too intertwined with the state. So when we look at the Indian model, it is a model which says that the BBC model is an outdated one. A model which seems to function as a corollary to the state machinery, does not therefore favor the perception of credibility, because you have to understand, you are in a country where your prime minister, as part of the broadcast policy, not just that, but also your British national security strategy and strategic defense and review, said that Britain will invest about $100 million each year in the BBC's digital and radio services to build a global outreach. Now contrast that with the way the Indian media is growing. The Indian media is growing with a bunch of hungry innovators based upon the spirit of private enterprise in an extremely competitive market. You know, Ben, today in India, we have at least 300 to 400 news channels. My network operates as one of them. And therefore, it's a tough market. And a tough market, but with great opportunity. One built on the principle of fundamentally private enterprise. When you say private enterprise, you go with one other assumption, that if you compromise your credibility, there is no viewership. And if there is no viewership, there is no business. So credibility is not just a compulsion, it is a necessity in our business. So you would find a tremendous amount of self-regulation as far as the Indian media is concerned. But then again, as Umang rightly said, we have a population that is so hungry. I think what one can touch upon, Ben and Manoj and Umang can also share more about, is the bursting of bandwidth in our country.
Totally.
The fact that today you have 900 million Indians with access to bandwidth that is unheard of. And then also keep one more thing, that Indians are very restless with adopting and rejecting technology. Just anecdotally, I'll tell you, India was the last country where the BlackBerry entered and the first country to reject the BlackBerry. So, you know, if you were to come to India in 2001 or 2002 or maybe even 2006-07, nobody would know what a BlackBerry phone is. And by 2010, the BlackBerry was history in India. So Indians generally are extremely restless. I'll give you one more figure. How are Indians consuming media? Indians no longer use the television screen to consume media. In the last general elections, I was surprised. Simply the digital live stream of Republic TV. Of course, on the 23rd of May, the day of the results, it was a weekday. So I assume a lot of people were watching us in offices and not maybe at home. But we found some 200 million watch minutes only in that 12 to 15 hour period. That is humongous amount of content consumption that is happening in India. And come to think of it, none of this was tweaked for a digital audience. Now imagine if I was to actually tweak content for a digital-only audience, that number could go up to an unbelievable amount. And that is what is going to spearhead the growth of the media. As far as editorial rules, etc. are concerned, the most amazing thing about our country is we are fiercely independent. For the last 15 years, we have not allowed governments to interfere. Manoj knows, and the others who in the audience know this, that some of the battles that we have fought, some of our battles we have fought editorially. We've taken on governments, we've taken on the Modi government, we've taken on the Congress governments, we've taken on ministers, we have run public campaigns, we've run activist journalism. And I remember once in the last government, a minister once told me that, is this Tahrir Square? Is this Egypt? Do you want to create an Egypt-like situation in our country? Yeah. But what that tells you also is the robustness of the media behind it. So that's why I believe technology, democracy, youth, knowledge of English, all of this is a fantastic cocktail for future growth. And of course, there are people like Umang who are not just content creators, but they are unique aggregators. So that provides another platform. And one last thing I'll tell you, we are very experimental. Today, we make our channel available on all platforms. So on the payments platform, leading payments platform in India, Paytm, If you go, you will find Republic TV live streaming. If you take a Ola taxi anywhere in India, the most popular taxi service, taxi aggregator, you'll find Republic TV there. Even if you go on Daily Hunt, you'll find Republic TV there. So we are distributing everywhere. The challenge is how do we monetize it?
Correct.
Our battles is today with the Googles and the Facebooks and others who are selling volume. So it's very difficult to monetize content in India when the global players are selling it for peanuts. So the global players come to India, their servers are in the United States of America, they hold no accountability to the Indian population, and they're selling inventory so cheap. So if people like me want to create quality content, we are competing against Google and Amazon and Facebook. So we have bigger battles, but we are going to find a way. And one of the ways probably for us is to not remain restricted to the Indian market, but to grow outside of it. So that's going to happen by next year, and by maybe 2021, 2022, you will find major media players, big investments in the media scape, and out of Pune and Mumbai and maybe Bengaluru, you will have big global media giants now beginning to mushroom out of the subcontinent.
Arnab, you won't be surprised to know I fundamentally disagree about my impartiality. But nonetheless, we can maybe talk about that offline.
If I can just come in here, I think Arnab makes a number of interesting points. But Ben, you talked about fake news. I want to, so there's fake news, but there's also fake analysis. And I want to bring back the conversation to the last elections. And why is it that every single so-called credible international news agency and news channel called these elections completely wrong? What happened there? Whether it's Time, New York Times, the BBC, The Guardian, The Economist, each and every one of these organizations got it wrong. Now, is that out of coincidence? Is that, what is it? That's not fake news. But is there something in that analysis that is fundamentally wrong? And that's where the efforts that people like us at India Inc. are doing is that, well, look, if the international organizations, media organizations are getting it wrong, yet there is significant interest, as both Umang and Arnab are saying, about India, and there's a huge, obviously, an Indian diaspora, then somebody needs to tell the India story as it is, or from an Indian perspective. And there are two major globalization stories. There's the China story, which is driven by the state, and the India story, which is driven by its business and its people. And that's where, when I set up India Inc. and India Global Business, we publish out of London. Our audience is not an Indian audience, it's a global audience. And I had this bug that said that, well, why is it that the BBC and Time and everybody else can sit there and pontificate about the Indian elections, that can and give analysis about the Indian economy, and they're getting it wrong a lot of the time now. And I'm being quite candid about it. What about Indian analysis about Brexit? What about Indian analysis of what's happening in Washington or what Trump and Xi? There needs to be that perspective.
Precisely.
And so that's the change that you're seeing now.
Yeah, Arnab, jump in.
Can I come in on this? I'm going to jump in on this, and please don't think I have a peeve against the BBC. I don't think it's outdated, but its credibility is questionable after reports during the first Gulf War. Everyone knows how BBC cancelled a Panorama program which exposed the fact that British companies had been involved in the development of a so-called supergun for Saddam Hussein. But that's not my issue. I'm from India, I'm concerned about India. My issue is that when the BBC is so cagey in its coverage even of the 26/11 attacks, instead of calling the Lashkar-e-Toiba terrorists, they refer to them as gunmen or militants. Now that is unflinchingly unacceptable. And my fundamental view today is that somewhere we have a view, and you can ask this anywhere. You know what's happening in the US. We need to ask ourselves why a lot of media organizations are beginning to operate out of Canada rather than the United States because of the domestic environment. Similarly, we need to understand that the media in the UK has not moved on, and the only place which can be a balancing act for the whole world, a balancing factor, has to come out of India, completely stand together, which is why people like me Manoj, do not want to only build global organizations to address Indians abroad. No, we have a view on the BBC. We believe that we can be a place where news can both be created and curated. After all, if news can be curated in London or curated in Atlanta, it can be curated in Mumbai. And we need to be open to the fact that we have it within our horizon. In the next 5 or 7 years, is a fantastic window of opportunity to actually make that happen, because we have the tenets of journalism behind us. We're not Vice, we're not Shane Smith, we're not non-serious players, but we are. The only problem with the Indian audience, it's been perhaps fundamentally insular so far. We have to break through that. We have to establish our own credibility. And may I just add one more anecdotal factor in that, Ben? Please understand, I'm a great believer in people from different nationalities working together out of any environment. I've studied in the United Kingdom. I've been a visiting fellow at Cambridge. I've studied in Oxford. But what I'm saying today is India is the biggest melting pot that is about to happen. In 2005 and 2006, we encouraged Chris Ayan and Tom Gloser of Reuters to make a 26% investment to launch the channel, which I saw. It was the first consumer-facing investment of Reuters. Of course, Reuters exited after 2 years. But for those 2 years, out of a mill in Lower Parel, not far from this office, we used to have people from 20 nationalities operating and creating a program called the Reuters World Report. So we saw that eventually media is geography agnostic. And the opportunities are fantastic. The availability of talent is unbelievable here in India. And I think there's a pride to it also. One fact which maybe many people in your audience will understand, there is a great pride to it. I mean, India moves very, 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 very fast. Every time in India, people feel that this country will not move. But then we took 1.5 years to move from the 130th position in the ease of doing business to 53rd in 2018. That is how fast India moves. Now, can that happen in the media? It will, because the pace of India's military, economic, and scientific growth proves what we can achieve in the short term. And the most recently evolved will always leap the farthest. And therefore, our evolution will be very quick in the next 2 years.
For so many reasons, we need to continue this conversation, Arnab, maybe later. I fundamentally disagree on so many things. But that is what we do.
You should go on one of his debates.
I should. I want to be in one of those boxes with 10 other people.
I'm glad I provoked you from 10,000 kilometers away. Imagine how much I provoked you when we meet face to face.
But yes, I am not. I'm aware I cannot become part of the panel, nor am I here to defend the BBC. But Arnab, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you so much, and also to you, the two of you here. It's been a really fascinating conversation. There is so much more we could talk about. I know everyone will be gasping for a coffee. I need a gin, I think. But nonetheless, please go and grab a coffee. We've got about 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll reconvene here then, so I'll give you a shout. But please go and get a coffee, and we'll have a little break.